So good morning, everybody. Buenos dias, and welcome back for day 3 now of the Latin America Spectrum Management Conference. It's hard to believe that we've had two days already. It's hard to believe we're now we actually are halfway through the event, and we've had some really fantastic discussions over the course of the last couple of days. A quick reminder for anybody who has missed any of those discussions that have taken place so far, has missed any of the sessions. All of those have been recorded. So all of those are available for you to watch back. You should have received an email after day 1 and again after yesterday's proceedings as well, with links to how you can access those. So please do feel free to watch back any sessions that you might have missed, or of course any sessions that you maybe want to watch back again, having seen them for the first time already. I also wanted to say a big thank you to all of you out there who have been contributing to the discussions during the sessions so far. We've had lots of questions, lots of comments coming in through the chat room, and I can remind you all that the chat, you'll see that on the right-hand side of your screen. So we have had a lot of questions coming through, and we've been putting those to the speakers and the panelists as part of the debates, and that really does add a lot to the discussion. So we want to continue hearing from you. Please do make sure you're continuing to put your comments, your questions for the speakers in that chat area, and we will bring those into the discussions during the latter part of each of the panels. Also, just a very quick reminder, as well as the stage area where you are now watching the sessions take place today, there are other different interactive areas on the platform. You've got the networking area, which is you'll find on the left-hand side, and also the exhibition area, where we have a number of our partners showing exhibition stands with videos, white papers, content. So please do go and check those out. If you are new to the platform, or if you weren't here on the first day when we demonstrated how the different areas work, then you will find a link in the reception area to a video guide of the platform that can show you all the different areas and help you get the most out of your time with us at the event. So please do make the most of that and check out those different areas whilst you're with us. Next up, I wanted to move on to today. So before we start, as I have done every day, just to remind everybody that we do have simultaneous translation running throughout the course of the event. So anybody who requires simultaneous translation, either in English or in Spanish, the details are here for how you can access that. So please do make use of that. I know in both of our sessions today that some speakers are speaking in English and some in Spanish. So if you do require that, now is your opportunity to get the app ready and to get the translation ready for that. Next on to the schedule for today. So in the 2 days so far, we've kind of looked quite broadly across different bands and some of the key issues, looking obviously at WRC 23, looking at 5G. We're now focusing on some of the bands that have already been discussed, but looking specifically at these in more detail. So we're now focusing down to look at some of these specific bands in a lot more detail. So we're starting today with 2 key mid bands. First of all, in a second, we're going to be having a session that's going to be focusing on finding the right balance for the future shape of the 6 gigahertz band. Following that, we have our showcase sessions. So the 3 showcase sessions today. So you can see the showcases that we have here, hosted by Colliago, Intel, and Viasat. So those will be running immediately following the conclusion of the first panel today. And then following that, we have a short break before we come back and look at another key band in the mid-band range, the C-band, looking at where we are with the C-band and where we're going with that as well. So 2 key bands that we're focusing on today in the very important mid-band range, which should be really interesting, and looking forward to those discussions. And then finally, very importantly, at the end of the day, the timings on this are actually a little bit wrong. Apologies, I'll have to correct that. So it's going to be from 12:45 to 1:15. In Bogota time, we have our first Have Your Say session. So talking about interactive ways for you to get involved, this is your chance to get involved. This will be your chance to bring your audio and your video feed live, and to come onto the stage and to give your comments on the discussions that you've heard. So please do be ready for that. Any questions, any comments that you have, as I said, use the chat room, but also be aware you'll have an opportunity to come up and to make those as part of that Have Your Say session at the end of the day today. So once again, a very busy day ahead of us. So I suppose without further ado, we better get going. And I'd now like to welcome to the stage Richard Marsden. Welcome, Richard. So Richard is from NERA, and he's going to be moderating the first session. So Richard, looking forward to it, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Buenos dias, everyone. So hello, and welcome to today's big fight. In the red corner, we have the supporters of the unlicensed spectrum community, and in the blue corner, we have the supporters of the mobile industry. The prize is 1200 megahertz of prime spectrum at the new frontier of the mid-band, 6 gigahertz. Mobile industry's had an incredible run in recent years, with repeated wins over the broadcasters in the UHF bands and the satellite community in the C-band, and successful forays into the millimeter wave. But could they have finally met their match at 6 gigahertz? Unlicensed users have already claimed the lower 500 megahertz of the band in Europe. And in the United States, representing Region 2, the FCC has gone a step further, licensing making the band available for unlicensed low power use and lightly licensed higher power users. Not so fast, says Europe, representing Region 1, who wants to study the band at WRC 23, where it could be identified for licensed mobile use. Okay, so joking aside, it's clear there's a real difference of opinion how the upper part of the upper 700 megahertz of the 6 gigahertz band should be allocated. And this debate is timely, obviously with the US already having taken the lead for Region 2. We now have Brazil consulting on whether it should follow that position of the US, and I'm aware of public interest in the use of this band in Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, amongst other countries. And there are many other countries around the world looking at this debate. For example, my team at NERA Economic Consulting is currently working for the Saudi regulator, CITC, on their spectrum roadmap. And as part of that, they're looking at the 6 gigahertz band and deciding exactly what to do with both the lower and the upper parts of the band. So to help us determine the best way forward for this band, I'm pleased to welcome a distinguished panel from the Americas and Europe who represent both sides of this debate. So representing, or at least leaning towards the red corner, we have Agostino Linnea, who's the manager of Spectrum, Orbit and Broadcasting at Anatel Brazil. We have Jane Stankovic, who's the Global Executive Director of Digital Infrastructure Policy at Intel. And we have Lester Garcia, who's Head of Connectivity Policy for Latin America at Facebook. And representing, or again, leaning towards the blue corner, we have Petar Pavsek-Taskov, who's Head of Mobile Department at the Slovenian Communications Regulator, ACOS, and I believe has been championing where Europe should follow with the 6 gigahertz band. We have Louise Zog-B, who's Spectrum Policy Manager at the GSMA, representing the global mobile community. And last but not least, we have Cesar Funes, who's the Public Relations Vice President for Latin America at Huawei. So, ladies and gentlemen, I expect a clean fight, but no one needs to pull their punches. Agostino, it falls to you to throw the first punch.
Thank you, Richard. And I would like to thank for the organization for inviting me. And I would like to say that I don't know if Anatel is in the blue or in the red corner. Maybe we are in the middle because the board will still have to decide some technical characteristics that would enable wireless access systems in the whole band or in part of the band, as I will show now. So let's talk about finding the right balance for the future shape of 6 gigahertz bands. Next one, please. And I would like to, for the beginning, to stress what will be studied or what is being studied in Agenda Item 1.2 for the WRC 23. For those who are not aware about WRC, it is the most important conference of radio communications. It is the World's Radio Communications Conference. It's like for Latin America, the World Cup, the soccer World Cup for us. So this agenda item calls for sharing compatibility studies in order to evaluate a possible IMT identification in the frequency bands listed below. So here we can see that for region 2, specifically, we have the frequency band 10 to 10.5 gigahertz. Globally, we have the 100 megahertz from 70.25 to 71.25. That is being studied globally, and for region 1, that is Europe, Africa, Middle East, we have the 64.25, 70.25 megahertz. So specifically, this part of the spectrum is not being studied. For region 2, we also have the discussions in the C bands. Regarding the 6 gigahertz band, it is very important for a region. For example, here in Brazil, we have more than 20,000 licensed stations operating from 59.25 to 71.25 megahertz. Next one, please. We have many services allocated in this band. For example, fixed, it is widely used for point-to-point links. We also have mobile allocation. It is used, for example, for mobile electronics new gathering, where broadcasters goes in a car and they point their camera, their antenna to in upper part of the city to connect and transmit online the news. We have fixed satellite service. It can be Earth to space or space to Earth. We also have some scientific services in these bands, as presented in some of these footnotes here. Next one, please. And I would like to stress what happened in WRC 03, because this was a very important milestone for wireless access systems in Radio LAN, because in that time it was approved additional spectrum for such application, including 5150 to 5350 megahertz and 5470 to 5725 megahertz for Radio LAN. We have the radio regulations, a resolution, that is resolution 229, that establish the technical and operational characteristics that we can use for wireless access systems operating in these bands. And here in Brazil, in 2004, we update our regulation with part of this regulation, and now in September this year, we updated this resolution was reviewed in WRC 19. Recently, we have a board's decision that identified the whole band for short-range devices in Brazil. Short-range devices in Brazil we call restricted radiation. But we still need to approve the technical specification of these short-range devices in these bands. So maybe we will have wireless access systems in the whole band, but maybe not, because wireless access systems is one application of the concept of short-range devices. Next one, please. So restricted radiation is a general term that we use, and basically in any band, except in some forbidden bands, we can have restricted radiation devices. But the general limits are very low. The equipment are very low power. And we have a list of bands where we can have restricted radiation devices with, let's say, special emissions characteristics. That is what we are discussing now here in Brazil regarding the 6 gigahertz bands, the technical characteristics that can be used in this band. Next one, please. And what the technical division proposed to the board of Anatel. Right now, this discussions is in the boards. We are waiting for the board's meeting where it will be approved, a public consultation. But we are considering two options. What we call FCC approach is to have the whole bands, the 1200, the 1.2 gigahertz for Wi-Fi 6E, for example, or the CPT approach, that is to have just the 500 megahertz. So we have these two options. We will consider to run sharing studies, but we evaluate the FCC and CPT studies, and we identified that everything that we were wishing to run in Brazil regarding sharing compatibility studies were already done. So that's why we considered these international studies, these foreign studies, in our work here. And we proposed the power limits that is presented here for low power indoor and the user device connected to low power indoor, that is 6 dB below from the low power indoor equipment, and very low power that can be used indoor or outdoor. Next one, please. So, of course, low power indoor can be used only indoor. The very low power is basically the wearables, and you can use indoor or outdoor. We also evaluated the standard power, but we did not propose the commissioners to have standard power right now. But let's wait how it will be used in other countries, and then in the near future we can consider to use it here in Brazil. We are also considering that the new radio unlicensed will be just like the LTU, the LAA, or multifier in the 5 gigahertz, and it will be possible to have NRU device the 6 gigahertz band as well. Next one, please. So what are the next steps? We see that there is a split support in the industry and mobile operators of who is supporting what. For example, from mobile operators, 3 of the 4 top operators in Brazil, they are supporting to, let's say, have the CPT approach now. Part of the industry is supporting one or other position. The boards will decide which frequency Brazil will deploy wireless access systems for technologies such as Wi-Fi 6E. After this, we still have to have a public consultation. Usually it is a 60 days public consultation. Back to the technical team to analyze the contributions. We propose the final text, and the boards in the end will decide what will happen here in Brazil. And we also to develop shared compatibility studies in the bands listed for possible IMT identification in region 2 or worldwide, with special attention to 10 to 10.5 gigahertz bands, because we believe that this is a possibility, considering that Europe or region 1 is considering that additional spectrum in 6 gigahertz bands for their region. So for our region, region 2, maybe 10 to 10.5 gigahertz a good option. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agostinho. And I apologize for suggesting that you might be in one corner or the other. Obviously, as a regulator, I understand you have to maintain independence. Now we'll move to another regulator, Meta Taskov, who's from the Slovenian regulator, ECOS. And Meta, I understand that you've been pretty active on the future of the 6 gigahertz band in Europe, and we'd love to get your perspective and whether what's happening in Europe is, you think, relevant to Latin America as well.
Yes, hello, thank you. Richard, my name is Mita Taškov. I'm coming from Slovenian regulator ECOS in Slovenia. And today I will present you Slovene vision of finding the right balance for future shape of the 6 GHz band. Next slide, please. Here I will briefly present you the Slovenia market. We have got 4 mobile operators, and they all as well own fixed infrastructure. So the incumbent is Slovenian-owned Telekom Slovenia. He is as well first in fixed in fiber market and fixed market. The second mobile operator, A1, who is owned by Mexican and Austrian ownership, has 28% of mobile active users. He is first in mobile broadband with 35%, but in the fixed market and fiber market, he's the 4th. Then we have the third operator, Telemach, is owned by US funds. He is 30.
Okay, we seem to have a technical glitch with the connection to Slovenia.
a lot of.
I think what we should maybe do, Richard, let's maybe move on. We'll try and get hold of Meta and sort that out. So let's maybe move on to the next presenter, and we'll try and come back to Meta, and we can start her presentation again. But we'll get in touch with her and try and get that sorted.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, okay. So let's, without further ado, let's move on to Jane Stankovic at Intel. Jane, I believe that your company is very much a champion of Wi-Fi use across the full band. Can you tell? We'd love to hear what your vision is, your company's vision is for the future of this band.
Thanks, Richard. And I agree with Agostino, actually, that it's very hard to say red corner versus blue corner in this case. But Intel is both a leader in 5G. We sell very heavily into the network infrastructure there, as well as in Wi-Fi. So I don't see it as something where we're 5G or Wi-Fi. We are both, and we strongly support both. And when we look at things, we're a technology company, right? So we look at things from a technical perspective. And so when we look at it, we look at both how it is to implement, but then also how it is for sharing. And when you look at this from an implementation perspective, the 6 gigahertz band is immediately adjacent to 5 gigahertz. So for our lines, our Wi-Fi, it is very easy from an implementation perspective to just extend up, because you can reuse components, and it works very seamlessly. And then when you look at 5G, the current 3GBP band classes are from 3.3 to 5 gigahertz for 5G. So we look at things like that. Then we also look at it from a sharing perspective. And as Agostino pointed out, you have FSS, the satellite service. Then we look at the ease of sharing with respect to uplink, where you're sharing with the space stations, or the downlink where there's Earth stations here within a country. And then we also look at the amount of, for instance, the fixed service. As Agostino said, these are very heavily used for the 6 gigahertz band is very heavily used for fixed service backhaul. Many of the mobile operators already are using this band for their backhaul. And similar to Brazil, many other countries have very extensive use of the band as well. So when we look at it from a sharing perspective, we look at it, how easy would it be to either clear the band, make it available for licensed service? Is it something that's better suited for low power or unlicensed use? So we took these considerations into account, and when we were looking at it, we are advocating very strongly to open spectrum within the mid-band tuning range for 5G and 3.3 to 5 gigahertz, and we're also advocating for the entire 6 gigahertz band to be allocated on an unlicensed basis to enable unlicensed while continuing the current use of the band by the existing incumbent services. So we are both 5G and Wi-Fi, but we look from a technical perspective to see what makes the most sense. And we think in this case, for 6 gigahertz, it makes more sense from an unlicensed basis. I do want to reiterate something that Agostino also said about the Work 23 Agenda Item 1.2. So for Region 2, which is the Americas, we are considering the 7025 to 7125 gigahertz band, the 10 to 10.5 gigahertz band, and then spectrum within that 5G tuning range from 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz and 3.3 to 3.4 gigahertz. So those are the bands that are under consideration in Region 2 for the Latin American administrations, as well as, all of the Americas. And then in Region 1, such as Meta was talking about, they are looking at 3.3 to 3.4 and the 6425 to 7025. I want to also say one thing about the previous World Radio conferences. I was actually working on Wi-Fi back in 2003, which tells you that I've been working on this stuff for too long. But in 2003, when the World Radio Conference made the last decision, we were using what was called IEEE 802.11a. That used 5, 10, and 20 megahertz channels. So we were able to utilize much smaller channels, but were the maximum. But today, 802.11ax is using 20, 40, 80, and 160 megahertz channels. And those are really important to be able to meet today's demands. I think everybody acknowledges that we have never had such a clear dependence and need for connectivity throughout all our countries. And it's really important to be able to meet the data rate needs for connectivity, and that includes these wider channels. So we're going up to 160 megahertz channels today, and that's one of the reasons that you need this wide swath of spectrum. And then coming up next, IEEE 802.11be is being worked on right now, and we expect to see up to 320 megahertz channels there. So just as the technologies have continued to improve from a license perspective as we move from 3G to 4G to 5G and utilize wider channels, also the same thing is happening from a Wi-Fi perspective. And so when you look at these channels, it's really important to have the broad swath of spectrum, but also to have it in a way that is able to be implemented in the devices, and more importantly, able to share with the incumbent users, or as appropriate, for instance, within the 3 to 5 gigahertz range, to clear the band for IMT or 5G use. So I'd like to wrap up here. Before I do, I would like to just reiterate something that Dan said at the beginning. Intel will be hosting Showcase 2 immediately after this session, where you'll be able to hear more information about 6 gigahertz and some of the information shared by the Wi-Fi Alliance and the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. So please welcome and join us in Showcase 2. Thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Jane. So let's retry our connection to Slovenia. Do we have Meta again?
Yes, hello. Maybe we can start from slide 3. Okay, so all free mobile operators have as well fixed network, and 4Play market is the main market in Slovenia. And this is due to extremely good coverage with LTE 10 megabit per second downlink and 2 megabit per second uplink. It's more than 98% of population and more than 90% of the territory. The COVID crisis showed that the networks are robust. Operators reported rise in data consumption approximately up to 30%, and in some peak hours up to 200%. Duration of average voice call was prolonged from few minutes to 1 hour. Peak hours were widened from 2 hours to 6 to 8 hours. And the extreme importance of fixed and airline connections were shown in in urban and suburban areas, but in rural, the mobile connection was crucial. All operators reported lack of spectrum. So Slovenian regulator will auction a new spectrum in spring next year. And as well, we supported the 6 gigahertz agenda items for the current WRC 23. Next slide, please. Why the mid-bands? It's important because of coverage and capacity. Currently, after auction, 100 megahertz of contiguous spectrum per operator will be probably enough to get first 5G deployments to support high-capacity citywide connectivity. But in second phase, in 5 to 7 years, we believe that 200 megahertz or more capacity would be required. And this is due to new applications such as UHD video and augmented reality and virtual reality applications, due to the evolution of new devices. And COVID crisis accelerated investment in e-health, smart homes, smart cities, and smart manufacturing. Fixed wireless success is crucial, and there is a popularization of unlimited data tariff plans in Slovenia growing very fast. Next slide, please. So why licensed use in the upper 6 gigahertz band? we believe this as the upper 6 GHz band fall in the same 3GPP band as 3.4, 3.7, that the similar usage would be optimal. Next slide, please. Coordination with 6 service is easily facilitated if you have a licensed regime. With fixed satellite services, report S2367 from WRC 15 showed that there are some issues in compatibility with fixed satellite service, but we believe that due to new technological features of 5G IMT 2020 and due to new recommendations, the new studies will show the improved coexistence. So active antenna systems beamforming implemented over massive MIMO antenna for 5G with beamforming power density could be lower than for 4G with larger radiation angle and constant power. There were new ITR recommendations adopted for Earth-to-space clutter loss, for Earth-to-space propagation, and for building entry loss. Currently, the work on ITU and 3GPP is going on. They're adopting IMT and incumbent parameters and models. Next slide, please. So what is Slovenian vision? It's adapted to the European case, of course. And we believe that the lower 6 GHz band it's excellent for license exempt airlines, but for the upper, we think it's preferable to have a licensed IMT solution. We think that the right balance in the mid-band spectrum between airline and IMT is to be addressed. We believe that in most cases, Wi-Fi speed bottleneck lies in backhauling part, e.g. fixed networks or even 5G. That Wi-Fi is one of the methods to offload the traffic. Wi-Fi mainly focuses on indoor and small cell coverage and cannot provide guaranteed quality of service. Wi-Fi can be seen as complement to IMT rather than alternative. Next slide, please. Okay, just to conclude, so Slovenia thinks that in the next 5 to 7 years, more spectrum is needed. We propose 6 GHz band, and we believe that the upper 6 GHz band is better to have the license approach because we feel that this band is complemented to 3.4 to 3.8 GHz band and would better protect the incumbent fixed and fixed satellite service. Thank you very much.
Richard, you're on mute, I think.
Thank you very much, Meta. And that's very interesting to get that very different perspective from previous presentations. We're now going to move on to Lester Garcia, who's head of connectivity policy at Facebook. Obviously, connectivity is, whether by mobile or Wi-Fi, is fundamental to Facebook's business. So Lester, please give us Facebook's perspective on 6 GHz band.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Richard. Voy a cambiar a español. Bueno, primero que nada, un agradecimiento a Forum por la invitación y la oportunidad de participar aquí con ustedes. Creo que es una oportunidad pues muy importante para hablar de estos temas y dejar nuestro punto de vista. Quisiera empezar por comentar lo que hacía referencia a Richard. Creo que en efecto, y lo entiendo así, es desde la perspectiva del propio debate y de que la audiencia y todos estemos enfocados y participantes de este tema, el encuadrar esto en una especie de duelo o batalla entre bandos. Yo retomaría lo que comentaba Jane y un poco Agustino al principio. Al menos de la perspectiva de Facebook, esto también se analiza desde un punto de vista técnico. Facebook, nos gusta decir que somos agnósticos en el tema tecnológico, así como tenemos iniciativas y proyectos con las telefónicas satelitales, así como nuestros productos y servicios llegan primordialmente a través de las redes móviles. Hoy estamos enfocados en esto, convencidos de que son razones técnicas de funcionalidad y, por supuesto, de características del mercado y de la propia vecindad con otras bandas, lo que hacen que Wi-Fi 6, en particular la banda de 6 GHz vaya o la propongamos como no licenciada para Wi-Fi, es por la perspectiva de mayor eficiencia y mejor funcionalidad para las redes, para los usuarios y, por supuesto, para los servicios que vienen más adelante. Next, please. En cierto sentido, lo que seguimos viviendo globalmente del tema de la pandemia y el hecho de forzarnos a estar en casa ha disparado el uso de las redes, lo comentaba un poco Meta también desde otra perspectiva, y bueno, en ese sentido, el uso futuro del Wi-Fi creo que ha quedado más que patente que será todavía más amplio, no solamente a través de esta situación que esperamos todos pueda resolverse eventualmente pronto, por supuesto, pero es el crecimiento de los propios usuarios, la sofisticación de los usos en casa, en oficinas, etcétera, y por supuesto también en otras aplicaciones outdoor, lo que hace prever que un mayor número de conexiones de Wi-Fi sea necesaria. Solamente el tema del desborde que las redes las redes móviles hacen sobre el Wi-Fi en hogares y en otros sitios, hablando de que 54% de ese tráfico estará para 2022 desbordándose. Los propios puntos de acceso de Wi-Fi que esperamos se cuatrupliquen de aquí al 2023, pues habla de esa necesidad de un mayor ancho de banda y una mayor necesidad y demanda por conexiones Wi-Fi. Al lado de eso, junto con ello, el tema de, por supuesto, la demanda en el sentido de los casos de uso y los propios drivers que vemos en el mercado actual y futuro. El trabajo remoto ya lo comentaba, esta transición que no solamente quedará en el tema del COVID, sino ya también será una tónica que seguiremos viendo sobre educación remota u otros servicios remotos como el tema de salud. Entretenimiento, por supuesto, será siendo un factor importante, videojuegos, etcétera, otras aplicaciones. Y bueno, por supuesto, servicios nuevos, innovaciones que vienen al mercado, que ya están aquí, pero que están desarrollándose y necesitarán estos recursos, como es el tema de realidad virtual y realidad aumentada. Next, please. Ya lo comentaban también quienes me precedieron en la palabra, pero ciertamente existen casos de usos diversos, no solamente desde el lado de la demanda, pero por supuesto del lado técnico, y algunas de las aplicaciones que ya los países empiezan a identificar tienen que ver con estas aplicaciones. Por supuesto, el LPI, Low Power Indoor, que obedece a estos servicios de Wi-Fi residenciales o en oficinas, el tema de BLP que habla y va enfocado a estas innovaciones que estamos empezando a ver en el mercado y que inclusive convivirán y serán parte de ese ecosistema 5G al necesitar de conexiones con los dispositivos móviles existentes. Y también hablamos de Standard Power Outdoor desde la perspectiva de conectividad. Eso nos permitirá tener nuevas avenidas y nuevas maneras de coadyuvar en la solución de la brecha digital, como en el caso particular de Facebook lo hemos estado haciendo ya en compañía con otras empresas en temas de hotspots Wi-Fi en zonas rurales. Bueno, por supuesto, contar con esta tecnología, con esta mayor capacidad, ayudará a que esos proyectos sigan creciendo. Next, please. Un tema que es fundamental es lo que los países han estado avanzando y lo que han logrado identificar sobre la importancia de no quedarse atrás y empezar a pavimentar el camino en lo que será la aplicación de los 6 GHz para Wi-Fi no licenciado en las diferentes regiones. Hoy esto ya es una realidad y creo que esto es fundamental. Tengo aquí en azul los países latinoamericanos que que han iniciado consultas o procesos específicos del lado de resoluciones ya tomadas, ya publicadas. Destaco, por supuesto, el caso de Chile en Latinoamérica, que ellos ya adjudicaron los 1200 megahertz para el tema de Wi-Fi no licenciado. Esta resolución, esta decisión es muy reciente. Y bueno, por supuesto, los casos internacionales ya conocidos, Corea, el Reino Unido, los Estados Unidos, el tema de la Unión Europea, todos con diferentes, por supuesto, características y anchos de banda que algunos de mis compañeros ya comentaron. Yo quisiera destacar el caso de Corea por estar asignando los 1200 megahertz, particularmente pensando en el tema de aplicaciones innovadoras como realidad virtual y realidad aumentada. Esa comprensión de la importancia de este servicio es lo que llevó a Corea a tomar esa decisión. Y bueno, los procesos regulatorios ya iniciados en Brasil, México, Perú y Costa Rica, algunos de ellos, por supuesto, ya preguntando sobre los 1200 megahertz para Wi-Fi no licenciado en 6 GHz. Next, please. Solamente terminando con el tema fundamental que creo que cierra bien esta discusión, si hay dos bandos o si estamos confrontando a la industria. Creo que a final de cuentas ese es un tema de balance, este es un tema de convivencia y coexistencia. Las aplicaciones licenciadas y no licenciadas son, por supuesto, complementarias. El desborde del tráfico, la necesidad de que estas aplicaciones ARBR, entre otras, convivan con las conexiones móviles. Y en ese mismo sentido, la necesidad de un mayor ancho de banda para Wi-Fi, siendo que 2.4 está congestionada, 5 GHz cada vez es más concurrida. Y bueno, y en ese mismo sentido, IMT ha tenido y tiene otras posibilidades y otras bandas en las que han realizado estudios, despliegues, etcétera, que puedan ser lo que les dé la complementariedad que ellos necesitan en sus servicios. Y bueno, solamente con eso terminando, creo que lo fundamental es llevar a cabo los estudios de coexistencia que sean necesarios. Creemos que el Wi-Fi no licenciado convive con las tecnologías hoy incumbentes. Bueno, habría que llevar a cabo los estudios con las otras tecnologías que quisieran estar compartiendo o conviviendo con ellas. Nuevamente, muchas gracias y pues estamos listos y para comentar y para sus preguntas.
Sorry, Richard, you're on mute again.
Thank you very much, Lester. Always got to remember that mute button. So there was, I think Lester made the point clearly that the mobile industry, of course, relies very much on Wi-Fi offload. And I think everybody agrees that Wi-Fi needs more spectrum. I think it's timely then to bring Louise from the GSMA into the discussion. Louise, your industry uses both unlicensed and licensed spectrum. They're both very important. So, what's your view on the right amount of spectrum for unlicensed versus licensed in this band?
Well, thank you so much, Richard. Voy a cambiar también para el español y gracias también a Forum Globo por brindarnos la oportunidad de hablar sobre una banda tan importante como el 6 GHz en todo el mundo. Y vamos a enfocar hoy en la armonización, no solamente regional, pero también global, y la importancia del proceso de la CMR para todas las bandas. Entonces, next slide, please. Antes de todo, es importante hablar un poco sobre el poder de la industria móvil, el pronóstico de 1.8 mil millones de conexiones en 2025 de 5G, representando 20% de todas las conexiones del mundo. Y también decir que empleamos 16 millones de personas en 2019 y 14 millones más indirectamente. Y la contribución al Producto Bruto Interno va a salir de 4.1 billones a 4.9 billones en 2024, representando 4.9% del Producto Bruto Interno. Next, please. Antes de todo, como muchos ya dijeron en sus presentaciones, es importante mostrarles que está claro para la industria móvil y para todos que la CMR23 tenemos el punto 1.2 del orden del día, que ahí está, nos muestra que la región 1 está hablando desde 6.425 hasta 7.125. Mientras las dos otras regiones, la región 2, donde estamos, y la región 3, está hablando solamente de los últimos 100 MHz. Next, please. Pero la CMR no funciona exactamente así. No es algo que hablamos en una región, pero no hay impactos en las otras. Las decisiones de armonización global traen muchos otros beneficios. Una encuesta que hicimos con nuestros miembros y también incluyendo la industria móvil como un todo, incluyendo los operadores móviles y los fornecedores, nos mostró en nuestro grupo ejecutivo que hay una prioridad máxima para la banda de 6 GHz en todas las regiones para nuestros miembros. ¿Por qué? Esto es importante entender que la armonización es súper importante. Estamos hablando de región 1 más China, 4.4 mil millones de personas. Entonces, es algo que nos muestra una economía de escala y también el futuro de los precios y la disponibilidad de dispositivos. Entonces, si empezamos en la región 1, esto va a ser una cascada para las otras regiones, como pasó en 3.5, por ejemplo, que empezó en 2007, hablamos nuevamente en 2015 y estamos de nuevo hablando en 2023. Y por eso es tan importante acordarnos de la historia de la CMR y cómo funciona, y también cómo ganamos con la armonización global. Next slide, please. Bueno, otra parte importante es entender dónde estamos hoy en la CMR, en el proceso. Estamos ahora hablando de características, demanda de espectro, necesidades, propagaciones, hasta el medio del próximo año. Después empiezan los estudios de coexistencia, de compartición y la preparación para la RPC de 23, que es en el inicio del año de 23 solamente. Y entre las RPC y las CMR23 que ocurren el fin del año, ahí sí son las interacciones finales y ahí vamos a saber cuáles son los estudios, los resultados y exactamente dónde estamos para tomar la decisión solamente en el fin de 2023, cuál es el futuro de esta banda. Next slide, please. Como muchos ya dijeron, esta banda está dividida en dos partes. La parte de 5.925 hasta 6.425 es la parte baja y una parte que no está en discusión en la CMR23. Pero toda la banda ya está lista para los servicios móviles porque están porque fueron por la alocación al servicio móvil. Y tenemos la segunda parte que va desde 6.425 hasta 7.125 y que sí está en discusión, como ya expliqué, en la CMR de 23. Pero, ¿qué están haciendo otros países? Hubo algunos ejemplos ahí en otras presentaciones, pero las grandes decisiones son de los Estados Unidos, China y Europa. Mientras China está dejando toda la banda para uso licenciado y los Estados Unidos para uso no licenciado, Europa está haciendo una decisión balanceada, que es los 500 MHz primeros ya se están preparando para el uso no licenciado y están esperando para los 700 MHz que están en discusión en la CMR de 23, dejan para la decisión después, que sí puede ser para la CMT. Pero una otra cosa importante es que los operadores móviles tienen backhaul en toda la extensión de la banda. Eso significa que todos los estudios deben considerar la coexistencia con el backhaul y también la continuación de este servicio, de esta conexión, porque es importantísimo, porque el backhaul en esta banda es importantísimo para los operadores móviles, porque es una banda que tiene un mix de cobertura y capacidad, y ahí es la última banda baja o mediana o media que es lista para que tiene disponibilidad de backhaul, por ejemplo. Next slide, please. Bueno, y entonces, ¿cuál es la posición de la industria móvil y de la GSMA sobre exactamente todas las partes de la banda y cómo pensamos que debemos considerar o seguir como próximos pasos. Bueno, desde 5.925 hasta 6.425, que es la parte inferior de la banda, ya está considerada para uso no licenciado en varios países. Pero la presencia del backhaul de los enlaces fijos inalámbricos debe ser considerada, mismo que la decisión de la administración sea para el uso no licenciado en esta parte de la banda. La segunda parte, de 6.425 a 7.125, los planes actuales son completamente diferentes en diferentes mercados, como han visto en otras presentaciones y en unos slides que yo he presentado. Y este rango es parte de la CMR en la región 1, pero hay un efecto cascada en todas las regiones por una armonización global y ganos de escala. Y bueno, ¿qué sugerimos como approach? Es considerar la protección del backhaul de los enlaces fijos inalámbricos para cualquier camino que sea seguido por las administraciones. Y evitar decisiones que no podemos revertir. Eso es importantísimo. No estamos hablando de un servicio licenciado, estamos hablando de un servicio no licenciado que puede empezar antes de un servicio licenciado y es casi imposible sacarlo para que un servicio licenciado empiece después. Y bueno, proteger, guardar los 700 MHz superiores para un posible uso de IMT. Y claro, esto todo significa, este es el enfoque equilibrado que sugerimos con las dos partes de la banda divididas y la protección de los 700 MHz superiores para que esperemos la decisión de la CMR. Muchísimas gracias.
Well, thank you very much, Luis. That's very interesting to get your perspective on that and the suggestion that countries shouldn't hurry to make a decision on the upper band. Okay, our final speaker on the panel is Cesar Funes, who represents Huawei. Cesar, what's your perspective on the band?
Gracias, Richard. Buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias al foro por invitarnos. Y primero que nada quisiera reiterar que estoy representando a un grupo de empresas líderes en la propuesta y desarrollo de soluciones para tecnologías móviles, incluidas, por supuesto, Wi-Fi, pero en este caso enfocándonos mucho en 5G. Next, please. Nosotros queremos hacer un enfoque como industria hacia el futuro de los casos de uso que estamos viendo, que se empiezan a potenciar de forma muy importante gracias a las características y los beneficios de la tecnología 5G. Por supuesto, están aquellos en los que los usuarios móviles van a seguir incrementando sus necesidades de tráfico, pero también hay otros, como específicamente hago referencia al marcado en rojo, el Fixed Wireless Access, que nos da servicio no solamente a los usuarios móviles, pero ya en ambientes de cobertura indoor dentro de nuestras oficinas o nuestras casas. Next, please. En particular, también sabemos que el desarrollo de la tecnología y de los mercados en 5G tiene ya algunos años, y en este caso les muestro información pública de algunas información que tenemos disponible. Por ejemplo, el caso de OpenSignal, en el que midió a principios de este año, en el final del primer trimestre y el segundo trimestre, 7-8 mercados en los que los servicios de 5G ya estaban desplegados. En estos mercados pudieron demostrar que las redes 5G empezaron a adoptar o a tomar mucho más tráfico que el que estaban tomando antes en 4G. Quizá suena razonable, pero la tendencia que estamos viendo en este sentido en términos del uso de las redes es que la calidad, la velocidad, la capacidad de las redes 5G es muy superior a la que tenemos en como dije, 4G, pero por supuesto en Wi-Fi. Por otro lado, algo mencionado también por Meta, la tendencia en el mundo es que el tráfico está creciendo. Nadie puede decir que en algún lugar el tráfico está bajando. El tráfico crece, los usuarios demandan mucho más tráfico y hay una tendencia en estos mercados en donde precisamente los planes se empiezan a ir muy altos, a niveles de 50 gigas al mes, 100 gigas, 300 gigas, prácticamente ilimitado. En Latinoamérica todavía estamos por debajo de eso, pero es una tendencia irreversible y global. La siguiente, por favor. Next, please. I'm sorry. Por supuesto, también hemos visto los beneficios que va a traer para la industria 4.0. Hay múltiples casos de uso en los que la capacidad, la baja latencia y la masividad de conexiones que ofrece 5G nos van a permitir incrementar, por supuesto, el desempeño de las redes, el desempeño de los procesos y, muy importante, el desempeño de los negocios de las diferentes industrias. En este caso, quiero reiterar y resaltar que es muy importante cuidar la calidad del servicio para garantizar las aplicaciones de misión crítica, que éstas puedan operar tal como las necesita el usuario final. Next, please. Como parte de las definiciones que vemos del IMT 2020, identificamos que se requiere mucha más capacidad, hasta 100 megabits por segundo o hasta 10 megabits por segundo por metro cuadrado, y estas necesidades que están claramente definidas por los expertos en estandarización nos indican que solo se pueden alcanzar con espectro adicional para las tecnologías móviles. ¿Qué cantidad? Lo estamos evaluando y al menos en algunos estudios preliminares hemos identificado que entre 700 MHz y hasta 1000 MHz adicionales van a ser requeridos. ¿En dónde? En las bandas medias, porque precisamente, como ya se ha mencionado previamente, las bandas medias son aquellas que nos dan un mejor balance entre capacidad y cobertura. Nos ayudan no nada más a subir esta capacidad necesaria requerida por el tráfico móvil, pero también nos van a ayudar en la cobertura indoor, que es en donde pasamos más tiempo durante todo precisamente la pandemia, pero en oficinas o en nuestras casas. Con lo cual, estamos seguros que el agregar más espectro en las bandas medias es lo que nos va a aportar a solucionar esta demanda de tráfico adicional. Next, please. Nosotros hemos iniciado ya como industria, los diferentes vendors, pruebas para ver cómo se ve la cobertura y la capacidad en estas bandas. Específicamente les estoy presentando una lámina en la que ya, gracias a la tecnología que 5G nos ofrece, Massive MIMO, entre otras, y que podemos aprovechar el direccionamiento de las antenas, entonces hemos logrado demostrar que la cobertura con 6 GHz es prácticamente la misma que con 3.5 GHz, con lo cual, si estamos viendo que el despliegue de 5G está siendo impulsado principalmente en las bandas medias y en algunas milimétricas, pero en particular la banda C, que se está afortunadamente armonizando a nivel global, pensamos que definitivamente la banda 6 GHz es el complemento perfecto para poder atender esta demanda de tráfico y la cobertura necesaria a nivel urbano, suburbano y, por supuesto, también tratando de aportar con tecnologías como Fixed Wireless Access en el ambiente rural. Next, please. En Latinoamérica el problema, como lo vemos nosotros, no es la saturación de dispositivos en el indoor de Wi-Fi. Nuestro problema, y la región 2 tiene diferentes realidades, en donde hay una gran capacidad de acceso de banda ancha, podemos posiblemente utilizar más el Wi-Fi, pero el problema en Latinoamérica es la cobertura de banda ancha. En este sentido, lo que nosotros proponemos es que para poder aprovechar el potencial de la economía digital, de la 5G, le debemos otorgar mucho más espectro a las tecnologías IMT y en ese sentido inclusive aportar al cierre de la brecha digital con tecnologías como FWA. Next, please. Bueno, creo que ya hemos hablado mucho. Next, please. Para concluir y respetar el tiempo que nos han otorgado para iniciar, quiero resaltar. Se necesita más espectro y estamos estudiando cuánto, al menos hemos identificado 700 a 1000 MHz adicionales para cubrir las necesidades de capacidad futuras. El tráfico móvil es muy importante. No vamos a estar estáticos en nuestra casa, no vamos a estar estáticos en la oficina. Nos vamos a seguir moviendo y el tráfico móvil en las zonas urbanas, suburbanas e inclusive las soluciones de Fiber-like en FWA nos obligan a necesitar más espectro en 6 GHz. Next, please. I'm sorry, no, esa es la última. Solo quiero resaltar que proponemos un enfoque global. La región 2 no puede quedar aislada, debe seguir viendo lo que está viendo todo el mundo y tener cuidado con tomar una decisión acelerada que después sea muy difícil de revertir, como lo mencionó recientemente la autoridad de la ITU en algunos foros. Muchas gracias.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Cesar. At this point, I'd like to bring up all our speakers. We have about 20 minutes for questions. So look, obviously I was a little bit mischievous at the beginning, setting this up as red corner versus blue corner, and clearly there's broad agreement that more spectrum is needed for Wi-Fi and more spectrum is ultimately going to be needed for IMT. But there does seem to be a real difference of opinion over where the correct balance is in this band. And Louise made a call for harmonization, but it seems like it's a bit too late. China, the US have already taken different paths, and it sounds like Europe will take a kind of intermediate path. Perhaps at this point we could just start with Jane and Lester, give them a chance to respond to what the IMT supporters were saying. Why do you think the right thing now is for Latin America to call the whole band for unlicensed, as opposed to waiting a bit to see how things develop? Jane, maybe I could start with you.
Right. Thanks, Richard. So I do want to comment on one thing. When you said balance in this band, I think that it's important to think about balance overall. And balance doesn't necessarily mean megahertz for megahertz. When you look at the spectrum that is being used for Wi-Fi today, it is still used by the primary incumbent users, which in many cases are radar applications, etc. And you're not able to utilize those bands when those services are in operation. The same thing is true when you look at 6 gigahertz, for instance, in the US, the incumbents have remained. So when you talk about balance, it's making sure, and as I said at the beginning, we strongly support spectrum for both 5G and unlicensed, but we look at it from the technical capabilities and the sharing capability. And the coexistence is just not the same as it is in other bands. And so we are strongly supporting additional mid-band spectrum for 5G, but when you look at 6 gigahertz, it really, when you look at the sharing situation, I think that's where you get into the need for this for unlicensed use. And I want to make one other key point. Wi-Fi today carries more than half of all internet traffic. And that's whether it's 5G, 4G, 3G offloading, whether it's cable modem access, fiber, any type of access. More than half of all internet traffic is carried by Wi-Fi. And so when you look at that, and you also look and see that the incumbents remain in the band, and you have to do this on a sharing basis. For us, the 6 gigahertz seemed like a very good fit for the entire 6 gigahertz seemed like a very good fit for unlicensed use, taking into account the need for additional spectrum and the sharing considerations. And then we were focused on additional mid-band access to 5G in other frequency bands.
Thank you. So Lester, I mean, I think there seems to be broad agreement between regions 1 and 2 that there'd be at least another 500 megahertz for unlicensed. Why do you think it needs the full 1200 now?
Yes. So I mean, one of the main reasons is the need for having that spectrum for technologies that are being being created or are being deployed in the market. And I would like to stress the importance of this. I mean, the market is not gonna follow regulation as it doesn't do in anywhere. I mean, the market has a dynamic of its own, and as we are seeing, that China made a decision, the US made a decision, the other countries can stay static, waiting for 4 years for a WRC that might not. I mean, it might not even decide on specifics that can be worked on right now. So in that sense, I think that if Latin American countries do not move as other countries are doing, they're going to be left behind the opportunity of consolidating this market and bringing opportunities of connectivity and innovation, new services to their users. I do agree we need more spectrum for IMT, but I also think we have other bands in the mid-band area that are suitable for that, and then there are even compatible in the sense that there are no incumbents or problems for coexistence. So in that sense, allocating or having the whole band for 6 gigahertz will permit the deployment of these services, the advancement of the market, and will not in any way affect other ways IMT technologies can have spectrum for their own services.
Jane, I think you had an additional point.
Yeah, I just want to make clear that the waiting for Work 23, World Radio Conference 23, for the 64 to 25 to 7025 is not within scope for Region 2. So it really is just over the top 7025 to 715. So Latin American countries, any countries in the Americas can move forward with any approach they would like to take, but the work is not a consideration with respect to this band, 6425 to 7025.
Okay, and just to follow up for everybody, probably for Leslie, I think you both mentioned other bands for IMT. What are the other bands, the other mid bands they should be looking at?
So different countries are actually looking at different places within the 3.3 to 5 gigahertz tuning range, and the IMT agenda 1.2 actually calls different bands out for Region 2, in particular 3.3 to 3.4, and then there's also the 3.6 to 3.8, and as Agostino pointed out, the 10 to 10.5 gigahertz. But in addition, there's also another agenda item, for instance, that looks at the 4.8 to 4.99 gigahertz band as well. So there are other bands within the tuning range, and then also countries could potentially utilize some of the IMT bands that have been identified for IMT globally or regionally, but have not been implemented yet within their country.
Okay.
And there's also some in 2.5 is also happening as well.
All right, so let's bring the mobile supporters in here. So what about those bands instead of this one? Maybe Luis, you could kick us off.
I think the first thing is that we are comparing something that is midterm, just something that is available right now for what has been happening in WRC. So we have 3.5 gigahertz and we can add 200-300 more. But when we're talking about Latin America, the GSMA has just released a report on specifically the 3.5 gigahertz. And when we're talking about the situation of 3.5 gigahertz, we can add more, but we do have other challenges in Latin America. As an example, as Agostino knows in Brazil, we do have the TVROs that will go somewhere at some point, but we don't have the availability of 3.5 gigahertz as we are now, and we will need more spectrum, as Cesar has presented. So the situation of the IMT needs is not fulfilled with what's available in mid-bands right now. So we do have some places to go, but those places are already, decisions are already made. So we are just kind of using the WRC as a consequence of the decisions because those are already allocated for mobile services. So that's also important there. And whenever we talk about, and I repeat that from the presentation, whenever we are talking about harmonization, we're talking about waiting for WRC 23 to see what the band will look like. So that means we're thinking about a midterm situation where we'll see how it plays with Europe. And if we make a decision to go for unlicensed right now, as some suggestions appear, we won't have a way back. And we will need that spectrum for IMT at some point. So this is really important to understand that the WRC is not something that divides regions and then we forget about the other ones whenever we're going for it. So it's understandable that Region 2 is talking about 7025, 7125, but there is a movement that creates economies of scale and interest from other regions, and also I've shown that the operators have high interest in that band.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to come in on this question? All right, well, we had a question already from the audience, which said, does it really have to be this binary choice between licensed or unlicensed, or are there better ways that mobile and Wi-Fi unlicensed could coexist in the band? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Is there a way you could share?
If I may, Richard, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, well, we strongly believe in the necessity of having licensed license spectrum for mission critical services. The IMT industry has always been delivering high quality services to all the end users. And we are serving, and the technology is serving millions of users sharing the same license band. Therefore, you can guarantee the customer experience. We don't believe that the coexistence of licensed and unlicensed technologies in the same band. We do see that the general example is that there is a need of unlicensed spectrum, which we believe is enough for now for applications such as Wi-Fi. But putting the two technologies together definitely are on a complementary basis. They are not comparable. The 5G NR, for instance, technology has sophisticated methodologies to schedule and set up deterministic operation for individual licensed spectrum. So from that perspective, we strongly support to look at the licensing of enough spectrum in order to cover, as Luis said, the future traffic demand. So it's not something that we are looking at right now. We're still struggling with the current spectrum available. And in the region, we're still seeing that many countries can add themselves to the previous decisions. So we're looking at this on the long term. Technology is currently being already developed. 5G NR is already on works in 3GPP, in ITUR. So the multiple standard bodies are already working on it. So we just need to be careful with the decision we make. And again, I want to stress out the topic. Any accelerated decision could be impacted in the future. So it's not that we have to wait. We just have to be careful.
Okay. Agostinho, you have to make an actual decision on this soon. You're going to get the consultation responses. It doesn't sound like this is going to be an easy call.
Okay, that's not an easy solution, but it's interesting because until WRC 19, let's say everything is okay. And suddenly the 6 gigahertz was the most important band that everyone was discussing. And here in Natal, every day we start to receive visits from part of the industry, part of the operators, and discuss about WRC. But considering that it is not under discussion for Region 2, this band. But of course, the spectrum is very important for everyone. But we are also considering, for example, the possibility to have a license for new radio. So it's unlicensed for 5G as well. So I don't know what will be the decision of the boards, but for sure they are considering all proposals. But in case, for example, WRC 23 decide for Region 1 to have IMT in the 6425 to 7025 for Region 1, what is the proposal to include in an agenda item for WRC 27 to evaluate what is going on in 2027 regarding possible identification for Region 2, and what about the 10 to 10.5 gigahertz for Region 2? I don't see, on the other hand, Region 1 asking for this additional 500 megahertz in 10 to 10.5 gigahertz, and it is already allocated in Region 1 for mobile. So that's why I believe that the 10 to 10.5 gigahertz is forwards for Region 2 once it is not included for discussion for WRC 23. But of course, more spectrum is needed for every technology, for every solution. In case it goes to wireless access system or for IMT, it will be very used for both solutions. So when we say a balanced approach, I think that we have to analyze a balanced approach in all spectrum, not only in 6 gigahertz bands. So a balance has to be in below 1 gigahertz, from 1 to 6 gigahertz, and above 6 gigahertz. So anyway, I think that we have many options, and there is more than one option that we can conclude it is a balanced approach.
Okay, Mette, you wanted to respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I can explain from the CPT point of view. The band 10 gigahertz was not an option because of some incumbents, some critical services. Therefore, we think that now it's possibility to harmonize globally the 6 gigahertz band, at least in the upper 100, which is global proposal for global identification. And here we see the benefit of economy of scale. I believe that it's very difficult and probably will be very difficult in future to have these INT agenda items to be proposed. Even for this WRC, there was quite a strong opposition from several countries. Therefore, I think it's probably the last train to have some global harmonization for this. Therefore, we preferred this licensed approach. Otherwise, we support, of course, a lot of spectrum for Wi-Fi for airlines. We think it's very important, but I think that probably this is the last train for IMT. Therefore, we prefer to go to the licensed approach. And there is as well the problem that the 6 gigahertz band in CPT is fixed service band for backhauling of mobile operators and broadcasters, and therefore it's quite important to be protected. And because of some bad experience of protection of weather radars in 5.8 and 5 gigahertz band, a lot of European countries are a bit skeptic on Wi-Fi and unlicensed use. I mean, we don't share this opinion in Slovenia, but this is the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis.
It's just a quick comment, so because I believe we don't have much time, but it is just to mention that there is no need to have an agenda item for Region 2 in order to make this available for IMT or to take any other decision later. First, because this band is already allocated to mobile services. So it is, if any country wants to decide for IMT now, that would be also possible, because they would be able to do as we are doing with the 3.5 gigahertz range, and then consequently updating the radio regulations in WRC. So that would be a possibility. The idea of what I was mentioning is not to say that we are waiting for WRC 23 to decide because of the bureaucracy. We're waiting to see what the band will bring us. We're waiting to see all the studies that are coming with the band and what the possibilities of those 700 megahertz are for us and for everyone. So it's different than just waiting and then having that afterwards in WRC 4 years later. No, that's not the idea. It is to see what's going to happen with the band. And as Cesar said, it's not to wait, it's to do it carefully, because if we decide for something, now that isn't licensed, we cannot go back afterwards. And if we see that this band should be, because of everything we've presented on the needs, for additional mid-band, we won't be able to go back and make the decision again. So we won't be able to clean this up.
Okay, Jane and then Lester to respond to that.
All right, I'll go very quickly, just in the interest of time. So I agree with the comment that it is very that any administration can do what they want within Region 2 because of the mobile allocation. So there is an existing mobile allocation, and countries can move forward now with that mobile allocation. I would also stress that the just as Europe decided not to, EMEA, Region 1 decided not to study the 10 to 10.5 gigahertz band due to their existing situation, Region 2 decided not to study the 6425 to 7025 gigahertz band. So to say, well, we don't want to study this band, but you should harmonize on ours, I think we should be respectful with respect to the decisions that were made. And then finally, I want to go back to one other point that Luis made earlier. about the bands that were identified. I think one of the critical bottlenecks that we see within the Americas region is that there is spectrum that's been identified within the radio regs, but has not been identified at the country basis. And we think it's very important for countries to be looking at those IMT bands and seeing where they can actually make some of that additional spectrum available as well, because there are the identifications, but the countries have not moved forward. So we urge countries to look at those and see also what they can do to make more spectrum available within the existing bands.
Thank you. Lester.
Yes, just a brief comment also on something that Luis was mentioning. I mean, as he said, I mean, in essence, any country could decide now what to do with the band, as actually they are doing with 6 gigahertz for Wi-Fi. However, the difficulty with IMT, and I mentioned this during my presentation, is the coexistence with current incumbent services, and at least the case of coexistence between IMT and fixed links, which we have here in LATAM in many countries in that band, would certainly be very complex, if not impossible, which is not the case for Wi-Fi.
Do you agree with that?
So that was for me, so because I thought Cesar was going to make a comment. It's interesting because this is what the Wi-Fi community is doing, is going outside of the WRC process to make sure that this is available. So on the other side, I am not saying markets will decide based on the possibility of doing it now. I'm just saying that if it comes to the point like we have in 3.5 gigahertz, where IMT should be available in that band, countries can do that before moving forward with radio regs. That's the only thing. So we wait to see what's going to happen with the band, and if necessary to do that before WRC, if it's necessary to do something, we'll forward and do it. It's not making the decision now or doing like we've seen with the Wi-Fi community.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I just wanted to make a final remark. We are strongly focused on what we can see after the studies. We want to make sure that every single piece of a spectrum is better used for the different applications. So I think that regulation is quite important. The market is pushing hard, but the market may fail sometimes. So I strongly believe in the regulators' work. They were doing a very good and professional work in every single country. So we will continue supporting as industry members. Again, I'm representing multiple companies. Then we're going to be here to help you make the best decision. And of course, you can continue looking at the showcases we've been presenting in the past few days. Most of us have been there. After us, there's another one from Coleago that is looking specifically on the technical definitions on how much spectrum is needed of IMT. So I encourage everybody to go and see there.
Right, thank you. All right, Agostinho, maybe if we could give you the last word as sort of the closest to a neutral party. Maybe you could just remind us, what do you think will be the process for Brazil to make a decision on this? How soon? I think you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. So thank you for the question. I believe that in some weeks we are going to have the board's meeting with this topic in the agenda. So as soon as the boards have a decision, and I don't know what will be the decision, we'll have this public consultation. And regarding all the comments, I think that everyone is right when what was presented, but raise the issue and the question, okay, but if countries start to do whatever they can do, that is based on provision 4.4 from the radio regs, why we need to discuss things in the WRC? So I think that the WRC is very important when we try to seek for harmonization, and I heard a lot about harmonization, but it's also an argument saying, okay, let's seek for harmonization, but outside ITU. But anyway, for sure, and Brazil have some bands that are not identified for IMT, like 27.5 to 27.9 gigahertz, that we are going to have this application for private network using 5G technologies. But I think that any of these two usages will be very important for the economy and for both sectors. Thank you.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much, everyone. I think that was a very lively and interesting debate. I'm going to declare it a draw, and I think we're going to have a rematch at the next conference. So thank you, everyone, again, and back to Dan.
Thank you, Richard, and I'd also like to add my thanks to everyone else. So a fascinating discussion, one that could have continued for a long time, I'm sure, but unfortunately we do have to wrap up and move on. But yeah, thank you very much to all of our panelists, and thank you to Richard for a fascinating session and a really good discussion. I think, Richard, you've summed it up quite nicely, and I think you can. I think we'll all agree it's a discussion that's going to continue. And talking about the discussion continuing, we're now moving on to our showcases. And I know that both Cesar and Jane have mentioned a couple of the showcases that are happening next. So to let you all know, the 3 showcase sessions that are going to be starting in literally about 2 minutes time over on our showcases stage. On showcase stage 1, we have a session hosted by Coliago that's going to be continuing some of the themes we've covered here. So looking at meeting the needs of all users in the 6 gigahertz band. Showcase stage 2, we have a session hosted by Intel, which I'm sure again will likely touch on some of these issues. So looking at the role of Wi-Fi in delivering next generation connectivity. And showcase stage 3, we have a session that's going to be hosted by Viasat, focusing on care, connectivity and recovery in the era of COVID-19. So those 3 showcases are going to be starting in just around about a minute or so over on the showcase stages. Following that, we have a break, and then we're back here on the main stage at 11:30 for our next session, which is going to be looking at the C-band. So looking forward to seeing you all back here then. In the meantime, thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to Richard, and looking forward to seeing you over on the showcase stages very shortly. Thanks, everyone.